He handed them the power to destroy him and called it a gift. But what one woman did with it made him question everything he believed. Salvo Siciliano had built a kingdom forged from loyalty, fear, and fire. On paper, he was a respected real estate mogul. In whispered corners of the city, he was something else, a man whose name could silence a room. But after surviving a betrayal that nearly ended his life, he began to wonder, if money couldn't buy trust, what would reveal the truth? So he devised a test. A black card with no limit. 3 women. No rules. And 3 days to show him who they really were when no one was watching. Power, ambition, and one act of quiet generosity that would shake everything he thought he knew. Hello, family. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss. Now, sit back and let's take you into the story. The chrome of the limousine reflected the skyline like a blade. On the sidewalk outside Siciliano Holdings, the boss stood still, dressed in a custom navy suit, shoes that had never seen dirt, and eyes colder than the glass behind him. He handed her the envelope without a word. Ellen Hansen, his girlfriend, camera-ready in scarlet, her lips matching the paint on her nails, took the card with a practiced smile and a kiss on the cheek. Across town, inside his sleek glass office, Salvo passed the same card to Sandra Castillo, his assistant, razor-sharp and quietly dangerous, more strategist than secretary. And finally, one arrived who wasn't supposed to stand out, Theresa Loftis. No red dress. No heels. Just worn sneakers, soft eyes, and the kind of quiet resolve that didn't belong in a mafia-built empire. 3 women. 3 cards. And one question behind it all. What would they do with power when they thought no one was watching? The doors of Maison d'Or slid open with a whisper, letting in a gust of chilled, perfumed air as Ellen Hansen stepped into the flagship designer store on 5th. Clad in a velvet red coat, sunglasses oversized and unnecessary indoors, she didn't just enter, she arrived. 3 sales associates noticed her instantly, one subtly nudging the other before making their approach with welcoming smiles and sparkling water in hand. Ellen didn't acknowledge them at first. Her eyes were already dancing over the curated racks like a predator scenting its prey. She wasn't just shopping, she was building an aesthetic, curating a narrative that said, "I've arrived, and I'll be staying." As she plucked a custom Valentino blazer from the hanger, her phone vibrated with a flood of likes, fire emojis, and "Yes, Queen" comments. She glanced down at the screen, her post holding the black card, captioned, "When loyalty looks like this," was trending better than expected. It had only been a few hours since Salvo gave it to her, but she already felt invincible, untouchable. That card wasn't just about credit, it was confirmation. Proof that she wasn't just his girlfriend, she was the one. Ellen paused in front of a mirror as a clerk brought her shoes. The reflection showed a woman sculpted for the spotlight, platinum hair sleek, cheekbones sharp, her red dress hugging every curve. She didn't always look like this, though. There was a time, not too long ago, when she'd sleep in borrowed t-shirts and work doubles at an overpriced rooftop bar. That was where the moneyed and the married came to feel young again. And where Ellen came to find her future. She met Salvo at a charity gala, pouring cocktails in stilettos that pinched and smiling at men who looked through her like she was part of the glassware. He'd been different, not soft, not warm, but aware. When she dropped a tray of glasses near his table, flustered and red-faced, he was the only one who didn't laugh. Instead, he handed her a crisp napkin and said, "Pick your head up, Bella. You're not made for crawling." That line, so precise, so scripted, was the spark. Within weeks, she'd quit the bar, moved into a penthouse guest room, gotten used to silk sheets and rooms that echoed when she walked. The romance was subtle, barely there, really, but the attention? That was real. Salvo didn't whisper sweet nothings. He gave her silence, access, and black tie invitations. And that was enough. Back in the boutique, Ellen slid her foot into a pair of designer heels that looked carved from molten gold. She knew what looked good on her and what her followers wanted to see. The associate brought her a tray of options she didn't bother looking at. "Just ring it all," she said with a flash of the card. "And make sure someone takes photos." An hour later, she walked out with 6 branded shopping bags, her driver holding most of them. She adjusted her sunglasses as she posed against the car, angling her head toward the sunlight for that perfect flare. "Give me boss energy," she told her assistant/bestie Amber, who snapped away with Ellen's iPhone. "Tag the brands. And make sure my hair doesn't look flat." The image would go live in minutes. Hashtag Queen in Red, hashtag Siciliano Standard, hashtag Luxury Unlocked. By sunset, she was sitting across from a private chef in her condo's modern kitchen, tasting samples for her upcoming yacht party. "We're going with Mediterranean fusion," she decided, waving her fork like a wand. "Seafood, caviar, but not too intimidating. I want elegance, not snobbery." Her phone buzzed again, another wave of RSVPs and a brand collab offer in her DMs. To Ellen, this was more than indulgence, it was leverage. The women in Salvo's orbit were smart, beautiful, dangerous. Some came from money. Others came from nothing but ambition. She knew if she let her guard drop, even for a second, someone else would slide into her spot. "Keep them watching," she told Amber, sipping Prosecco. "The moment you stop performing, they start replacing." She ordered a private styling session the next morning, followed by a consultation with a PR strategist. "We need to reposition me," she said. "Not just as Salvo's girl, but as someone women want to be and men want to chase." The strategist nodded, furiously typing notes. Ellen tilted her head. "Make them forget I was ever a bartender." Meanwhile, Salvo scrolled through her stories from his office. Ellen in a new dress. Ellen popping champagne. Ellen dancing in front of a panoramic window to a playlist she called Money Never Sleeps. His face remained blank. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Just distance, like watching a stranger parade through a house that once held silence. He placed the phone down and turned toward the window, hands behind his back. Outside, the city gleamed with steel and secrets. Inside, he felt colder than ever. "She didn't ask why," he muttered. "Not once." Back at the condo, Ellen examined a lineup of dresses for her yacht party. One was too conservative. One too gaudy. Finally, she settled on a custom silk wrap dress in deep crimson, elegant, commanding, impossible to ignore. "This is it," she whispered to her reflection. "Queen energy only." The next post went live seconds later, her standing barefoot on the yacht deck, red dress fluttering, champagne bottle in hand. The caption read, "No crown needed when the throne is already mine." Hashtag Queen in Red. Hashtag Black Card Unlocked. Hashtag When Power Loves You Back. The likes poured in. The comments gushed. The world applauded. But Salvo? He just stared at the screen, unsmiling, unmoved, and whispered, "She thinks this card made her untouchable." Then he turned the screen off. And for the first time since giving it, he wondered what it might cost him to take it back. The moment Sandra Castillo received the envelope, she didn't smile. She didn't gasp or ask questions or blink twice at the weight of the black card nestled inside the thick paper. She simply tucked it into her leather planner, finished her espresso, and walked back into Salvo's office like nothing had changed. But everything had. Not because of the money, but because of the message behind it. Salvo Siciliano never did anything without a reason. Sandra had known that from the day she met him 6 years ago, fresh from a consulting gig that had taught her how power moved beneath the skin of cities. Most people thought she was just a personal assistant, the woman behind the man, holding his schedule and secrets. But Sandra had always been more. Not quite consigliere, not quite co-conspirator, just close enough to influence, and far enough to watch without flinching. She worked in shadows and silence. Booked meetings between people who didn't exist. Smoothed over problems before they ever reached Salvo's ears. But she also listened when he let her. Like the night his brother bled out on a cold marble floor, and Salvo showed up at the office at 3 a.m., smelling of ash and whiskey, collapsing into the chair across from hers. "I should have seen it coming," he said, eyes rimmed in red. Sandra didn't interrupt. "He trusted the wrong man," Salvo continued, voice low. And I told him loyalty was a choice, not a guarantee. He didn't cry. But something in him cracked, and that night, Sandra didn't offer advice or comfort. She simply stayed until morning, and that was enough. So when she received the black card, she knew it was a test. A provocation. A question wrapped in luxury. He wasn't giving them money, he was watching how they'd use it. And Sandra, as always, played to win. She started with a lunch meeting at a quiet garden bistro in Midtown. Across from her sat Dev Patel, a mid-level city official with access to zoning permits and no loyalty to anyone who couldn't boost his re-election fund. Sandra ordered wine, leaned in slightly, and said, "How many fingers do you need to lift a fence around the riverfront property?" He laughed, but she didn't. By dessert, she had a verbal agreement and a burner number for follow-up. Next was dinner with a developer. Not a flashy one, a discreet one, whose companies had 4 shells and a Cayman backdoor. She didn't flirt. She didn't beg. She showed the card, offered stakes in a project that didn't yet exist, and made him believe he was stealing from someone else. It worked. It always did. The third meeting was more dangerous. A man known only as Kessler, who operated 2 levels below legitimacy and 1 step above scandal. He was the man who made dirty assets sparkle, who knew how to whitewash criminal footprints through fake nonprofits and real estate laundering. Sandra met him in a private booth at a jazz lounge, dressed in navy silk and no expression. "I need 3 buildings cleaned and 2 names removed from the deed trail," she said. Discreetly. Temporarily. Kessler sipped his whiskey. "And what do I get for risking my license?" She slid the card across the table. "You get paid," she said, "and you get the satisfaction of knowing I'll owe you. Just once." He chuckled. "You Siciliano's secretary?" "I'm the woman who makes sure he wakes up without subpoenas," she replied. That ended the questioning. Back in her apartment, Sandra reviewed her notes. 2 shell corporations registered. 1 new project pre-approved. A handful of favors owed. 2 markers called in. She hadn't bought a single item of clothing. No perfume. No shoes. Just power, moved like chess pieces across a city map only she could read. The planner beside her laptop was neat, color-coded, and efficient. Her to-do list didn't include brunches or spa days. It included city council meetings, offshore wiring strategies, and silent partnerships. She opened to a blank page and scribbled, "After Q2, I don't need him." Underneath, she added, "But he'll still need me." There was no bitterness in her handwriting. No resentment. Just precision, the same kind of cold clarity she'd used her entire life to stay ahead. Sandra didn't want Salvo's heart. She didn't need his attention. She needed his infrastructure, but only long enough to build her own. In the years working for him, she'd watched how power was earned, lost, and hidden. She'd learned who whispered in backrooms and who controlled from balconies. She never wanted to be the queen. Just the architect behind the throne. The one with keys no one else knew existed. But deep down, she knew something was shifting. Not just in Salvo, in everything. The test wasn't just his. It was hers too. Could she step out of his shadow without lighting a fire behind her? Her phone lit up with a notification. Siciliano Holdings. Yacht event. 9 p.m. Private list confirmed. She smiled faintly. Of course Ellen was planning a party. A crown without strategy. A throne without foundation. Let her sparkle. Sandra closed her planner, took a slow breath, and opened a secure messaging app. She typed a note to one of Salvo's foreign contractors. "Availability next quarter? Thinking of making a move." Quietly. The reply came almost immediately. "We've been waiting." She didn't react. Didn't smile. Just locked her phone, leaned back, and whispered, "Good." Do you think Sandra is wrong for planning her exit, or is she simply doing what Salvo taught her? Survive at all costs? Let us know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to follow each twist in this power game. The envelope came without fanfare. No signature. No logo. Just thick, black paper slipped under her door like a secret. Theresa Loftis found it as she was getting ready for her night shift, balancing Ezra's backpack on one arm while tying her work shoes with the other. She picked it up slowly, frowning, and opened it at the kitchen table while eggs cooled and cartoons murmured in the background. Inside was a credit card, sleek, heavy, with no name, no limits, and no explanation. She stared at it for a long time, heart knocking hard against her ribs. Ezra looked up from his cereal and asked, "Is it from the school?" She smiled thinly. "No, baby. It's from someone who made a mistake, I think." Her apartment was small but spotless, 2 bedrooms if you counted the converted laundry nook where Ezra slept. The wallpaper peeled near the vents, and the heat clicked loudly at night, but it was theirs. Theresa worked 2 jobs, part-time delivery driver in the mornings, hospital laundry tech in the evenings. Most days, she ran on caffeine and instinct, but Ezra always came first. He needed braces. She needed a new car. The fridge needed fixing. But somehow, they made it work. She put the card in her drawer, planning to return it once she figured out where it came from. But then, as she folded laundry that evening, a memory returned, sharp and burning like the night air that had singed her lungs. The fire. The man in the car. The one she'd dragged from behind the wheel just before the fuel tank gave out. He had whispered something in Italian, maybe, then passed out in her lap before the ambulance came. She never knew his name. Never followed the headlines. Didn't want a reward. But now, holding that card, she wondered, was this his way of saying thank you? The next morning, her neighbor cried behind their paper-thin walls. Miss Hall, apartment 3B, had fallen behind on rent again. Her daughter was sick, hospital bills piling up like dishes no one had the strength to clean. Theresa didn't think. She just got dressed, tucked the card into her purse, and walked 3 blocks to the leasing office. 3 units, she said to the manager. Paid up through June. Quietly. The woman raised an eyebrow but swiped the card. No questions. No judgment. Just a soft beep, and 3 lives bought a few months of peace. She didn't stop there. She visited the clinic on 8th Street where Ms. Hall's daughter was being treated. Anonymous donation, she told the nurse, sliding the card over the counter. Put it toward whatever they can't cover. The nurse stared, stunned. Theresa didn't explain. She just nodded once and walked out. Later that day, she went to the used dealership near the overpass, the one with handwritten signs and cracked concrete. Her old sedan had died the week before, and she'd been borrowing a coworker's bike ever since. She found a navy blue minivan with a dent in the side but good bones. It smelled like crayons and hope. The dealer asked, "Want to finance?" She shook her head and handed over the card. Ezra beamed when she picked him up from school. "Whoa, is this ours?" She ruffled his hair. "Just borrowing it for a while," she said with a grin. "Let's see if it likes us." That evening, they delivered hot meals to the women's shelter on East 12th, the one she used to stay at when Ezra was a toddler and her world was still cracked wide open. She didn't tell them the card was hers. She just handed over groceries, diapers, and prepaid phones with quiet hands and a tired smile. "You don't have to do this," one woman whispered. "I know," Theresa replied. "But someone did it for me once." She went home that night, bone-tired, but calm in a way she hadn't felt in years. Her back ached, and her wallet was still nearly empty, but the silence in the apartment felt warm, not hollow. She pulled the card from her purse and stared at it again. So much power in something so small. She hadn't spent a cent on herself. No new clothes. No fancy meals. Not even a haircut, though she'd needed one for months. Every dollar had gone outward. As if the card didn't belong to her at all, just passed through her hands on its way to where it was really needed. That night, she sat at the tiny kitchen table with Ezra fast asleep and wrote a letter on lined paper pulled from his notebook. Her handwriting was neat, careful, the way her mother had taught her when neatness was one of the few things she could control. She didn't know where to send it. Didn't even know what name to write. But her heart knew who it was for. "To whoever gave me this. I don't know why you chose me or how you found me, but thank you. Not for the money. For the trust. For believing I'd do the right thing. I hope I did. Sincerely. T." She folded it once, tucked the card inside, and placed it back into the black envelope it came in. Then she slid it into her purse, where it sat for the rest of the week untouched. She would return it when the time was right, when she had the words to match what it meant. But for now, she just closed her eyes, leaned back in her chair, and let herself disappear, not from the world, but from the noise. Because some women didn't need crowns. Some just needed enough silence to keep being good. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the laptop fan. Salvo Siciliano sat alone at the long obsidian table in his private office, the kind of table where empires were planned and loyalties interrogated. The lights were dim, casting thin shadows against the walls lined with books he hadn't touched in years. A glass of untouched bourbon sat to his right, the ice already half melted, beads of condensation collecting like sweat on a brow. In front of him, 3 files, color-coded and watermarked with Siciliano holding security clearance. He clicked the first file, Ellen Hansen, and the screen came alive with movement. There she was, posing outside the designer boutique, red dress gleaming like a weapon, holding shopping bags like trophies. Each purchase was time-stamped and cataloged. $87,000 in 3 days. Dresses, yachts, jewelry, food she didn't eat, and champagne she didn't finish, all for the camera. A short video played, Ellen handing her phone to a waiter and repositioning herself in front of a rooftop skyline. "Just get the bag in the shot," she said, brushing hair from her cheek. Then she laughed at something her friend whispered, something about how easily rich boys give when they feel guilty. Salvo's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. He watched until the video ended, then closed the file with a slow breath through his nose. He clicked the next tab, Sandra Castillo. Her dossier opened to a map, points blinking in 4 different districts across the city. Her spending was methodical: 5-star business dinners, political contributions, hotel conference bookings under LLCs. No luxury items. No public appearances. Every dollar traced back to leverage. A clip played next. Sandra seated in a rooftop lounge, drink in hand, leaning in to whisper to a man with a congressional lapel pin. She smiled, nodded, then passed him a small envelope under the table. The audio was muted, but Salvo didn't need words. He'd seen that move before. And only one type of person knew how to smile like that and make you believe it was a favor. He paused the feed and leaned back, rubbing his jaw. Sandra wasn't wasting time, she was moving pieces. Building something. Or someone. And she wasn't waiting for permission. 12 grand, he muttered. Bought her a seat at a table I never invited her to. Finally, he opened the last file, Theresa Loftis. No map this time. Just a quiet log of simple transactions. Rent payments to 3 separate addresses. A children's clinic donation. Grocery orders. A used minivan from a lot under the expressway. And a note. Cash transfer to East 12th Women's Shelter. No receipt requested. The footage was different too. Grainier. Less flashy. Theresa didn't know she was being recorded. The first clip showed her exiting a small grocery store, hands full of paper bags, walking steadily in the rain. She stopped near a bench, opened one of the bags, and handed a sandwich to a man in a tattered coat. No words exchanged. Just a quiet nod. Then she walked away. Another video, taken from a distance, showed her at the hospital front desk. She slid the card to the receptionist, then looked away, as if ashamed to be doing something good. The nurse smiled. Theresa didn't wait to be thanked. She simply turned and disappeared through the sliding doors, like she had somewhere more important to be. The third clip caught him off guard. It was a still shot of her kneeling beside a child outside the shelter. Ezra, most likely. She was tying his shoe while he held a carton of milk. The kid giggled at something she whispered. Her face was soft, tired, but alive in a way Salvo hadn't seen in years, not in the clubs, not in the boardrooms, not even in the mirror. He closed the laptop slowly. Let the silence return. The bourbon still sat untouched, the room still dim, but something inside him had shifted. He whispered, as if afraid the walls might hear, "She didn't even ask why I gave it." Then louder, "She didn't ask for anything." He stood up, walked to the window, and stared down at the city that had once belonged to him like a promise. The money, the power, the networks, none of it had moved him like the sight of a woman feeding a stranger with hands that had known hunger. Ellen had flaunted. Sandra had maneuvered. But Theresa had given. Not for praise. Not for access. Just because someone needed help. That kind of person didn't belong in his world. Which meant maybe, just maybe, he needed to leave his world behind to find her. He turned back to the table, opened his phone, and dialed James. "Invite them," he said quietly. "All of them. Dinner. One night. Private suite." James hesitated. "All three, sir." Salvo nodded. "They showed me who they are. Now it's time I show them who I've become." If someone gave you a black card with no limits for 3 days, what would you do with it? Be honest. Drop your answer in the comments below, and if you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens at the dinner table. The real reckoning starts now. The chandelier hanging above the Siciliano penthouse dining table flickered like it knew the weight of the night. Crystal droplets shimmered in soft golden light, casting halos over the polished walnut surface that stretched beneath it. 6 chairs sat in quiet, calculated symmetry. But only 4 were filled. The air was scented with aged wine, roasted lamb, and the tension of unspoken truths. Outside the wall-length windows, the city pulsed with life, unaware that inside, something heavier than business was about to be served. Salvo sat at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, no tie, collar unbuttoned, shoulders squared like a man preparing for war without raising his voice. To his right, Ellen shimmered in deep red, a dress so tight it looked poured on, her lips glossy, eyes sharp and already impatient. Across from her sat Sandra in a tailored black pantsuit, silver brooch glinting like a dagger, her posture regal and unreadable. And at the far end, quiet and unsure, sat Theresa Loftis, in the same coat she wore the night she pulled Salvo from fire, her hands clasped in her lap, the envelope still sealed in her purse. She hadn't touched the wine, nor the silverware. The silence broke with the soft clink of Salvo setting his glass down. He looked at each woman one by one, not rushed, not theatrical, but with the gaze of a man who had already seen what he needed. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low, even. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here." Ellen raised an eyebrow. "Considering you sent black cards like party favors, I figured we were celebrating something." Salvo didn't smile. "In a way, we are," he replied. "We're celebrating honesty. The kind you can't fake with wine and dresses." Sandra shifted slightly in her chair, eyes narrowing. Theresa said nothing, but her shoulders tensed. He leaned forward, fingers laced. 3 cards. No limits. No rules. Just time, freedom, and silence. I wanted to see who each of you were when no one was watching. The table went still. The chandelier caught the breathlessness of the moment and held it in its glass. Ellen laughed. "Wait, are you serious right now?" she asked, voice sharp with disbelief. "You gave us access to your wallet and now you want a report card?" Sandra said nothing but stared, not confused, not surprised, just calculating the angle of this new game. Theresa looked down at her lap, as if hoping to shrink into it. Salvo remained unmoved. He turned to Ellen first. $87, $432, he said. "In 3 days. Spent on handbags, champagne, yacht rentals, and a photographer to follow you around." She scoffed. "It's my style. You said no rules." "And I meant that," he nodded. "But when someone gives you everything, what you do with it shows who you are." Ellen bristled, red-painted nails tapping hard against her wine glass. "So what? I enjoyed myself. That's the point, isn't it? You wanted me to feel special." "I wanted you to be honest," Salvo replied, calm but firm. "And you were. You spent like the cameras were always on." Her face darkened. "You know what, Salvo? You don't get to play saint just because you watched from behind a screen. I've been with you through silence, through dinners where you said nothing but expected me to sparkle. I was your image. Now you're upset I made myself the center of it." Salvo looked at her, not angry, just tired. "I wasn't upset. I was disappointed." Ellen's chair scraped harshly against the marble floor as she stood. "You think you're better than me? Sitting there judging like a priest with a portfolio. Her voice cracked at the end. She grabbed her clutch, took one last look at the table, then at Theresa. "Good luck," she hissed. "You're next." And then she was gone. A long silence followed, broken only by the distant hum of the city outside. Salvo turned to Sandra, who was already sitting straighter. "You spent just under $12,000, he said. Every dollar on meetings, donations, political handshakes. A lobbyist. A shell corporation. 3 appointments with a fixer I thought had disappeared." "Efficient," Sandra said, her voice cool. "You should be impressed." "I was," he admitted. "Until I realized none of those moves had anything to do with me." She raised an eyebrow. "You're surprised that I plan for a future?" "I'm surprised," he replied, "that in all those calculations, you never asked if I'd be part of it." "I assumed you wouldn't be," she said, finally letting her tone sharpen. "You don't plan. You rule. There's a difference." Salvo nodded once. "And you don't follow. You ascend." Sandra smiled faintly. "So what now? Do I walk out like her?" He paused. "That depends. Are you still playing the game?" She stood slowly, eyes never leaving his. "I was never playing," she said. "I was surviving." Then she walked out, heels soft against the stone, door closing behind her like a final statement. Only Theresa remained. She hadn't moved. Her shoulders were tense, her face pale, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her water glass. Salvo turned to her, softer now. "You didn't open the envelope until the second day," he said. She looked up, surprised. "How do you know that?" "Because the transactions didn't begin until after the hospital visit," he replied gently. "I didn't know what it was," she whispered. "I thought it was a mistake." He nodded. "But you used it anyway." "For them," she said. "Not me." He clicked a remote. A screen behind him came to life, showing still frames from the footage. Theresa handing a sandwich to a homeless man. Theresa paying off a nurse. Theresa hugging a child in a shelter hallway. Each frame was a painting of quiet grace. "You changed more lives with $10,000 than I've done with entire foundations," Salvo said. His voice cracked, just slightly. "And you never posted about it. Never even asked why I gave it." Tears pricked Theresa's eyes. "I didn't think I was supposed to," she said softly. "I didn't think I was someone who gets picked." "That's why you were," he said. He stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair, not as a boss, not as a man with power, but as someone trying to understand something that had humbled him to the bone. "Theresa," he said, gently taking her hand, "this was never a test for you to pass. It was a chance for me to see what's left of the world I thought I'd lost." She blinked through tears. "And did you?" "In you," he whispered, "yes." The room went still again, but this time, the silence wasn't sharp. It was soft, reverent. A space newly formed between two people who hadn't planned on being seen. She wiped her eyes and laughed lightly. "I wore the same coat I rescued you in. I didn't know what else to wear." "It was perfect," he said. "So was everything you did." The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped between her bills and an expired coupon flyer. Plain, ivory, no return address. The paper heavy, smooth, expensive in the kind of quiet way Theresa had learned to distrust. Inside was a single brass key on a leather tag embossed with 3 numbers, 412. No instructions. No explanation. Just something that felt too permanent to be an accident. Theresa turned the key over in her palm as Ezra finished his cereal. The boy had no idea anything was different. He hummed between spoonfuls, legs swinging off the kitchen chair, milk mustache half formed above his grin. Theresa stared at the envelope again, then the key, then out the window where her rusted minivan sat in the parking lot like a loyal but tired dog. The message was unspoken, but undeniable. This wasn't a thank you. It was a line drawn across their lives. She took a cab to the Bronx address, her fingers gripping the key like a loaded question. The building was a brownstone, 3 stories of red brick, white-trimmed windows, and a door painted the soft green of spring leaves. No locks had been changed. The key slid in like it had been waiting. Inside, the air was clean, the light generous, and the silence warm. Everything had been furnished: couches, rugs, bookshelves, even a stocked kitchen and a vase of daisies on the windowsill. There were bedrooms, 2 of them. One already held a desk with Ezra's name carved on a plaque. The other had linens in her favorite shade of blue. The fridge held almond milk, the brand she liked. The hallway closet had a jacket in her size. It wasn't grand, but it was intentional. And that was what made her angriest. She slammed the front door shut and took a cab straight to Siciliano Holdings. The receptionist barely had time to stand before Theresa pushed past the security desk. Her coat flared behind her like a cape, hair windswept and eyes locked forward. She took the elevator to the top floor, palms sweating, jaw set. No appointment. No fear. She was done pretending she didn't belong. The elevator dinged and opened onto Salvo's floor, the hall wide and empty like a museum waiting for footsteps. His office door was slightly ajar. She didn't knock. She stepped inside with a fire she hadn't known she still had. Salvo looked up from behind his desk. He wasn't surprised. "Theresa," he said quietly. "I was hoping you'd come." She threw the key on his desk like a gauntlet. "What is this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached over, closed the folder in front of him, and leaned back slowly. "It's yours," he said. "The home. Everything in it. Paid in full. No strings." Her voice shook, not with fear, with fury. "You think I want to be kept? That I want to be someone you rescue?" He said nothing. She stepped forward. "I've scraped for everything. I've begged landlords, sold rings, skipped meals so my son could eat. And you think a house will make me feel, what? Grateful?" "No," Salvo said gently. "I don't want your gratitude." "Then what do you want?" she demanded. "I want you to understand," he said, rising from his chair, "that you didn't beg. You gave." She blinked, startled by the softness in his tone. He continued, slower now. "You gave to strangers without blinking. You gave peace to people you didn't owe anything to. You gave me something no one else in my life has ever bothered to, clarity." Theresa stepped back. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, but from everything breaking loose inside her at once. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, voice raw. "I'm not used to being seen." "I know," he replied. "Neither am I." The words landed heavy in the space between them. He stepped around the desk, but didn't come closer. "You don't have to take it," he said, nodding to the key. "But if you do, don't do it for me. Don't even do it for you. Do it for Ezra." Her chest tightened at the sound of her son's name. Salvo looked down, then back up, something softer in his eyes. "He deserves a safe place to dream. And I think this house, it's the first thing I've done lately that feels right." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick with truths too big to speak. Theresa stared at the key on the desk. For a long time, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached for it again, not like she was accepting a prize, but like she was reclaiming something she'd already earned. She curled her fingers around it, then looked up at him. "I'll keep it," she said. "But not for me." Her voice steadied. "For him." Salvo nodded. "That's all I hoped for." She turned to leave, the weight in her chest lighter, the fight in her spine not gone, just quieted. But before she reached the door, he spoke again. "Theresa?" She paused, glancing over her shoulder. "Will you meet me again?" he asked. "Not here. Not in my world. Somewhere quieter." Her eyes searched his. Not suspicious. Not hopeful. Just honest. "We'll see," she said softly. And then she walked out, the key now warm in her palm, like it had finally found its home. The change began quietly, the way tides shift beneath a calm sea. One by one, the old routines fell away, the late-night meetings, the coded calls, the silent transactions that made men rich and kept others afraid. Salvo Siciliano started saying no. To deals that promised more power, to alliances built on fear, to the kind of loyalty that only lasted until the money ran out. His empire didn't collapse overnight, but it began to breathe differently, slower, cleaner, uncertain. He'd stopped attending the private dinners where men wore suits worth more than the workers they exploited. He no longer accepted envelopes, favors, or veiled threats disguised as gifts. His accountants panicked. His rivals whispered. His own bodyguards started asking questions. But Salvo didn't flinch. For the first time, he wasn't defending his name, He was protecting his peace. One afternoon, he stood at his office window watching the skyline shift under the glow of sunset. The same view that once made him feel untouchable now only made him feel small. Somewhere down there, people were laughing, living, losing, and starting again, all without needing to own a single thing. His reflection in the glass looked older, quieter. He finally saw himself not as a ruler, but as a man trying to unlearn the crown. That night, he dreamed of his mother. She stood in their old apartment in Little Italy, the kitchen window open, her hair tied back with the same red scarf she always wore when she was cooking. Her hands smelled like basil and soap. She was younger than he remembered, her voice strong but kind. One day, she said, "Your kingdom will collapse if it has no soul." He'd laughed back then, too young to understand. Now the memory struck him like confession. In the morning, he made his first call. Not to his legal team, not to his business partners, but to an accountant he trusted to keep quiet. Within a week, the paperwork was done. Salvo Siciliano, the man once whispered about in underground circles, had created something called the Nostra Vita Fund. A nonprofit. Clean. Transparent. Dedicated to helping families caught in the crossfire of the very violence he'd once profited from. The first donation came from him. Quietly. No announcement. No press. Just a wire transfer with a note. "For what I owe." It wasn't redemption. It was something more humble, a beginning, or at least the attempt at one. On Sundays, he started showing up at the community center where Theresa volunteered. No entourage, no suit, no car waiting at the curb. Just Salvo, sleeves rolled, hair tousled, hands rough from fixing things he used to pay people to replace. He didn't say much at first. Just observed. Kids running through the halls. Women organizing food drives. Laughter that didn't come with an agenda. It was life in its rawest form, and he couldn't look away. The first time Theresa saw him there, she froze in the doorway. He was helping stack boxes, talking to a group of teenagers like they were old friends. No spotlight. No show. Just helping. When their eyes met, he smiled, not the charming smile that once bought silence, but a real one, the kind that said, "I'm trying." She approached slowly, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Didn't expect to see you here," she said. "Didn't expect to like it," he replied. "You're not supervising," she teased. "You're working." "First time for everything," he said, and they both laughed, the sound catching between them like sunlight through glass. Over the next few weeks, their rhythm found its way forward, wordless at first, then steady. Theresa managed logistics and volunteers. Salvo handled repairs and funding. They shared quiet lunches, conversations about how change never starts loud but grows steady when hearts commit. The man who once signed deals to control the city now painted walls in a building that sheltered its most forgotten. It was irony, maybe, but to Salvo, it felt like grace. Sandra noticed the change before anyone else. She'd left his inner circle, built her own consultancy, but her curiosity about him hadn't disappeared. One afternoon, she saw a news clip online, a brief segment about the community center expansion. The camera caught Salvo in the background, hammer in hand, smiling beside Theresa. Sandra stared at the screen for a long time, realizing what she'd never understood. He wasn't walking away from power. He was redefining it. "He's building again," she murmured to herself. Just differently. For the first time, she didn't feel envy. Just a strange, reluctant respect. Inside the community center, Theresa and Salvo stood in front of a large whiteboard filled with plans. "We've rebuilt the kitchen, fixed the roof," she said, tapping her pen thoughtfully. "But we're still missing something." "What's that?" he asked. "A way for these women to stop coming here for help and start coming here for opportunity." Salvo crossed his arms, thinking. The idea came to him like a pulse. "A job hub," he said. "Training, placement, childcare support, everything under one roof." Theresa's eyes widened. "That's ambitious." He smiled faintly. So was giving away a black card. They worked late into the evening drafting the proposal. Theresa handled the outreach plan, while Salvo made calls to trusted partners who owed him favors from his past life, this time using influence to build, not destroy. The idea began to take shape, the Siciliano Initiative for Women's Employment. No luxury branding, no flashy events. Just opportunity, carved from the cracks of old mistakes. When the final draft was done, Theresa leaned back, exhausted but glowing. "You could have hired anyone for this," she said. "Why me?" Salvo looked at her, really looked, and said, "Because this isn't a job offer. It's a partnership." The word landed between them with weight. Partnership, not of status, but of purpose. Theresa smiled, small but genuine. "You sure you know what that means?" "I'm learning," he said quietly. "One step at a time." Outside, the sky over the Bronx darkened into 1,000 shades of blue. The city kept moving, cars, lights, sirens, people chasing what they thought mattered. Inside that small, bright room, two people stood side by side, rewriting what mattered really meant. The kingdom Salvo once ruled had lost its soul. But here, in this humble corner of the city, he was building one worth keeping. Do you believe someone who's lived in the dark can ever fully rebuild in the light? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happens when Salvo's past comes knocking again. The shift between Salvo and Theresa was quiet, like dawn slipping into a dark room. There was no declaration, no sudden change, only the subtle certainty that something had taken root. Their conversations deepened, no longer just about work or the community center, but about life, regrets, dreams they didn't know they were still allowed to have. He began showing up not just to help, but to listen to what she needed, to what Ezra was drawing in his notebooks, to what the world looked like through someone who hadn't spent years wielding control like a sword. And Theresa, for the first time in a long while, let someone witness her without armor. She started attending night classes twice a week, walking into the adult education building with a worn backpack and nervous smile. It wasn't easy juggling Ezra's schedule, volunteering at the center, and memorizing public policy terms by flashlight after bedtime, but it was hers. She began speaking at small community events, sometimes shaking, sometimes shining, always real. She talked about housing insecurity, about what it meant to live one emergency away from collapse, and how one act of kindness had given her a second wind. After each event, Salvo would wait quietly at the back of the room, never stepping forward, always watching with that same look, like he was still trying to believe she was real. He no longer saw her as someone he helped. He saw her as someone who reminded him what helping was supposed to look like. The woman who once barely met his gaze now moved with purpose, not loud, not polished, but firm. At the center, people started calling her Ms. Loftis, with a respect that didn't come from fear, but from trust. Ezra began running up to Salvo in the mornings, talking to him about math homework and toy drones, the way boys do when they've decided someone is safe. And though Salvo still kept his world small, Theresa had found a way to fill it with warmth. Then, one Wednesday morning, Ellen walked back into his office. She was dressed like nothing had changed, sharp heels, designer bag, flawless makeup. But her eyes held a sheen of desperation, the kind that luxury couldn't mask. "Salvo," she said breathlessly, stepping in without invitation. "I've been thinking. About us. About how fast things happened." He didn't stand. He didn't invite her to sit. He simply looked at her like a ghost had walked in wearing too much perfume. "There is no us, Ellen," he said quietly. "There never was. You liked the room I stood in, not the man in it." She flinched but pushed on. "I made mistakes, yes. But I loved you. I have photos. Messages. You can't say none of it mattered." He finally stood, slow and calm. "I'm not angry," he said. "But I'm not interested in rewriting what we both know is a performance." She stepped forward, voice cracking. "You're choosing her?" "No," he said, walking past her. "I'm choosing peace." And just like that, he walked out mid-sentence, not because he wanted to win the moment, but because there was nothing left to say. That afternoon, a deal landed on his desk, one that came wrapped in gold and red tape, shiny enough to tempt any version of his former self. A merger offer from a global firm that wanted to redevelop a massive stretch of city property. The payout? Triple his current valuation. The cost? The land beneath the community center. He read the proposal twice. The numbers were clean. The contract's airtight. If he signed it, he could vanish into another version of himself, richer, more powerful, untouchable. But then he thought of the garden Theresa planted behind the center, of the job training sessions, of Ezra helping a younger boy with spelling homework. He thought of the laughter echoing off walls that once sat empty. And he realized he'd already built something worth keeping. He turned the deal down with one sentence: "I'm not trading soil that grows something real for another glass tower." The silence that followed that decision wasn't judgment. It was awe. That night, he walked the cracked sidewalk to Theresa's brownstone. He didn't bring flowers or a speech, only himself, a man who'd once built kingdoms and now stood outside a home with real light inside. She opened the door in an oversized sweater, hair pulled back, face clean. "You look like you've walked through fire," she teased. "I turned down an empire," he replied. "Then you've earned tea," she said, stepping aside. They sat in her small kitchen while Ezra slept upstairs. She poured him chamomile and watched him across the table. "You're quiet," she said after a while. He nodded. "I've been thinking." She waited. "I used to build kingdoms," he said, voice low. "But I was always alone in them." The words hovered between them like a confession. Not seeking pity, just truth. Theresa reached for his hand. Not out of romance. Out of recognition. And together, they sat there, two people who had lost much, found something, and finally stopped running from themselves. The wind outside whispered through the trees, brushing against the windows of the brownstone like it had been invited. Inside, the warmth of soft light glowed from a bedside lamp shaped like a crescent moon. A little girl with tangled curls and curious eyes sat cross-legged beneath a blanket dotted with stars. She clutched her stuffed lion tightly as Theresa smoothed the covers around her, sitting beside her with a book she never opened. Tonight's story, as it often was, wasn't one written in pages. "Tell me the one about the three women again," the girl said, eyes wide. "The one with the card?" Theresa smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. "You remember that one?" The girl nodded, "but I forget how it ends." Theresa leaned back, folding her hands in her lap. "All right, baby. Just one more time." She took a breath, the same way she always did before starting the story. "Once," she whispered, "there was a man who gave three women everything he had, not because they asked, but because he wanted to see who they truly were when no one was watching." The little girl's brow furrowed, listening closely. "One of them used it to sparkle," Theresa continued. "One used it to climb. And one used it to give." As she spoke, the scene shifted quietly through time, not in the room, but in memory. A hallway inside the community center, now expanded and thriving, held a glass frame mounted on the wall. Inside it sat a single object, a black metal credit card. The placard beneath it read, "What you do with power reveals who you are." Kids ran past the frame laughing, volunteers filled tables with job applications, and parents gathered in the lobby for a literacy workshop. In the center of it all, Salvo sat beside a group of teens, helping one with a resume draft, his sleeves rolled, his eyes kind, no trace left of the man he used to be. In another city, under bright lights and cameras, Sandra Castillo stood on a TED stage, commanding attention in a navy blue blazer, her voice steady, her words cutting. She spoke about ethics, strategy, and the cost of choosing growth over greed. Behind her on the screen flashed her new foundation's name, one focused on women in policy and leadership. When asked during the Q&A how she knew what mattered most in her career, Sandra replied simply, "Someone once gave me freedom. I used it wrong. But I learned what to do when you get a second chance." And miles away, Ellen Hansen posed in front of a beachfront hotel in Monaco, hair gleaming, her lifestyle brand tagged in every shot. She ran a multi-million-dollar company now, built around luxury coaching, image, and confidence. Yet every time she gave an interview, when asked about her past, she would pause. "There was a man," she'd say, eyes softer than her tone. "And I'm still trying to be someone who deserved what he gave me." Back in the bedroom, the little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. "What happened to the man?" she asked. "The one who gave the card?" Theresa's eyes sparkled as she looked down. He found peace, she whispered, because the woman who didn't want anything gave him everything he didn't know he needed. The girl's eyelids began to flutter, the story lulling her into that warm space between dream and memory. Theresa leaned in close, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Good night, baby." She stood, tucking the blanket tighter, and turned toward the doorway, where Salvo stood, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, listening quietly. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His smile said it all. They walked down the hallway together, passing photos, Ezra in his graduation robe, the opening of the second community center, their daughter's first school play. The house was modest by his old standards, but every corner held something real. Theresa poured tea in the kitchen while Salvo grabbed the paper. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was earned. Outside, the garden they had planted together continued to grow, wild, colorful, untamed. Inside, the warmth was no longer artificial. Salvo glanced once more toward the hallway where his daughter slept. "Funny," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone. "I once ruled cities with fear." Theresa looked up. He smiled gently, his voice steady. "Now, I rule a home with love." Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.